This card changed the rules of damage in MTG. Many of you have probably played MTG for a little while now, especially since the release of Universes Beyond. But for those of us who's played Magic for several decades, remember a very specific card called Samite Healer. It's a 1/1 that states tap to prevent 1 damage to any target. This iconic card basically symbolizes how damage was represented in 1993, intended, and how it moved forward throughout the years and affected what damage is made in 2024. Let's get started. So, how does attacking and defending work in the ABU or in the 1994 side? When you talk about the ABU, it's all about damage. If a player suffers damage, that player loses 1 point for each point of damage suffered. And if a creature is damaged, note how much damage it took in case it suffers more damage later in the turn. You usually won't need counters for this. If the damage done to the creature in one turn is equal or greater than its toughness, the creature is destroyed and must be put into the graveyard. If a spell does damage, but the card doesn't specify a target, the controller may choose to damage either player or any creature. This was known as damage on the stack. And for those of you who are wondering where I'm getting the sources, this is all directly from the mothership or the original rulebook. So feel free to visit magic.wizards.com to read the sources in more detail, or the links within the description of this video. As we continue exploring how attacking and defending works in ABU, you have to also understand the phases. In this case, the player declares an attack, the opponent declares defense. There are fast effects, in this case, instants, sorceries, and or interrupts. For those of you who don't know what interrupts are, interrupts became eroded as instants in the more modern era of Magic. But interrupts can only be used against other interrupts, whereas instants can be done in isolation of interrupts, and sorceries can only be done during your turn. After these fast effects, damage was dealt. As you move forward, you then start to realize the effects of these instants, sorceries, and interrupts when it comes to the damage on the stack. And when certain creatures were pumped up, or in this case, deflated or debilitated by these magic spells, will you then see the resolution of damage to be on the stack. So if you pump something up to 4 and you didn't deal 4 damage or even lethal 5 damage to match it, it would still remain alive, even though you've dealt at least 3 or 4 damage before it pumped up to avoid lethal. Now, when you start moving forward into Magic, you start to wonder the damage changes in Magic 2010. Combat damage no longer uses this stack that we all know and love. It's now have evolved into something we like to call combat damage assignment. This is what we all know and love, especially in the early masses of 2024, where you could decide who gets lethal based off of who blocks first. And then, of course, this also varies on the different types of evergreen abilities that your attacker may have, whether they are a first striker, a double striker, or a pumped up, trampled version of whatever their power is or the left number on their card. As this combat damage isn't being used in the stack, it's also important to understand the breakdown of the combat phase. Beginning of combat step, declare attacker step, declare blocker step, combat damage step, and end of combat damage step. Now, in between each of these little bullet points, can you inject a sorcery, an instant, interrupts, or in this case, again, modern instance, and unless the card specifies that you cannot counter it in a few cases, a la Crossing Grip. Typically, this adds on to the complexity of the combat damage assignment rules. So the combat damage is now removed from the stack, but the spells that are in between these combat phases are still stacking up, first in, last out. Now, when the playtesters at Magic did decide to play this, they even were quoted on the mothership and they said, "We've been playing this change for months and we found that the first part of the change, having combat damage not use a stack, is a positive move for the game as a whole. And the second part of the change, doing different things with double blocking, comes up amazingly infrequently. That's the more complex part of the change. But it matters only when there's a double block. Someone has a combat trick, and the situation falls somewhere between kill all blockers or kill just one blocker. Now, for those of you who play with smaller creatures like White Weenie or aggro goblins, having two 1/1s facing up a 2/2 bear or any type of 2/2 or 3/3 or anything bigger than a 1/1, this is where the math for blockers meme is essential, right? However, in this particular case, a lot of what Magic's testers, as were quoted on the mothership at the time, said that's the only application of this. There's actually a Redditor who commented about the impact of 6th edition, which I completely overlooked while I was researching this, but I left a link in the bio that you should definitely take a read in terms of how and why the new effects of damage isn't as impactful. I respectfully agree to disagree, but take a look for yourself. So now, in this case, I think the biggest issue that we all come to know and love at this junction is combat tricks. Does the instant archetype or subtype even matter at this point? As you already saw, interrupts were fizzled out, no pun intended, of course, and kind of lumped in with the rest of instants in modern Magic. But if we were to kind of revert back into this kind of stage of attackers being able to choose where lethal damage is being inflicted, and we cannot respond to that, unlike the previous iterations of combat, as shown in ABU in 2010 and even 6th edition, why do we even have instants to begin with? Why can't they just all be sorceries and that can only be played during your turn? I don't understand the point of this card. And what's even crazier is I love instants. I'm not even a blue player. I love it as a red player. I love casting Lightning Bolt just to kill you out, or even Teamer Battle Rage just to kind of double up my damage on Monastery Swift Sphere. But if you remove this whole strategic aspect of quote unquote combat tricks, is it even strategic anymore or even helpful for the Magic community? I mean, I don't even remember anybody even asking for this type of change. And I've been playing this game from anti-era, modern competitive, pauper competitive, even casual commander, and nobody in their right mind has ever come up to me and said, "Hey, I don't like how combat tricks work." It's sort of an intuitive part of the game that makes you think, "Oh, I might get ambushed. I better hold up my mana or hold up my resources for something." So to me, I know this is a point of contention and probably a hot take, but I do think instants should still matter, you know? And that's my conclusion to all of this. Yes, you're creating instants in a brand new foundation in after pre-release of November 15th, 2024, to set the new foundation for Magic 2025 and for years to come. But I honestly do ask Wizards and whoever's in charge of making these rules to revert back to why we need to have the old system. I don't think it's really helpful. it does a disservice to the new players, and for those who are playing probably incorrectly or non-intuitively of how combat damage and combat tricks works. Um, this kind of promotes this laissez-faire of lazy thinking, in my opinion. So, if you want to continue making the game better, you want to create 20 variations of Wolverines and maybe one of one Infinity Stones that represent Power 9 and Mox 9 and the whole 9 yards, whatever you want, keep going with that. That's a business move. I get it. But the reason why Magic is symbolic and different from Hearthstone, Marvel Snap, Flesh and Blood, and many other TCGs, we have this type of nuance of strategy. We don't just freely give it out. And I think this is why combat tricks should still be meaningful, and that we should not go down this rabbit hole again of damage being presented to the attacker only. Anyways, thanks for enjoying this video. I was going to create a more casual video, but because of the nuance of and the timing of the situation of releasing damage and the lack of coverage from even some of the bigger creators, I figure I'd share my 2 cents. I don't know how much people will listen to this or will even care about it, whether WotC would even care. But as one player that has been pretty dedicated to the game for a decade plus, I think it's wise to consider this opinion. Thanks. Please share, like, subscribe, and this is Rev, and I'll see you guys later in the next video. Cheers.